pastor, a priest, and a musician walk into a comedy club, and now we're going to make you some content. Hi, I'm Father Andrew Miller.
And I'm Reverend Michelle Byerly.
And I'm Gail Gallagher, and I'm here again!
And
Welcome.
This is A Pastor and a Priest Walk Into a Movie Theater, a podcast about faith, life, and the silver screen. Today we'll be discussing Bo Burnham's Inside.
Gail, you were the one who suggested this lovely gem for us to watch. Can you kind of tell us how you came across it and get us started?
Absolutely. Okay, so Bo Burnham's Inside. For those who don't know, Bo Burnham's Inside is a comedy special that Bo Burnham made in 2020 in his house. And so it is a piece of fine pandemic art. And it is very much explores sort of the life of having to make things for this audience that you're not seeing while you're in a pandemic, and you're having all these mental health issues, and like trying to heal the world with comedy, and is that a thing that you can even do? And it just goes in all these different places. And I think why I like it is I am a musician who is creating things during the pandemic and, feeling all of those struggles. So there's definitely a lot that resonates for me in there. And I should also add, just to give some backstory for listeners who haven't seen this special. Also, Bo Burnham was like one of the first internet native comedians. Like he became sort of internet famous as like a teenager on the YouTubes. So also part of the journey that he's exploring is this constantly being in front of an audience as he's come into adulthood. So anyway, that is the basic thing, and I suggested it because I thought it would be there's a lot of different things to explore and unpack.
The what the fuck are we doing here at New Faith, New Media? Are healing the world through theology. But there's one line that in that song that really gets to me. The world needs direction from a white guy like me. And it's like, what? Wow, are we so narcissistic as to believe that our ideas can really heal the world? Go.
So Andrew, just shut the fuck up.
Okay.
By the way, listeners, the song we are referencing is one of the first songs, entitled Healing the World with Comedy, in which Bo Burnham gets like a sign from God that says, you must heal the world with comedy. And it's very self-referential and like making fun of like comedians, and like there's like there but it is also an interesting study. I think the line that pops up to me is like, maybe I should shut the fuck up. Long pause. I'm bored. I don't want to do that.
Yeah. But then he continues into this conversation where he asks that question, is it necessary that we should have something to say about everything?
Yeah.
And I have wrestled with that a lot because, when I started on Facebook or whatever, there was a sense of posting a lot of different things. And now when I hear about things that come up, especially being someone who is in public ministry, there's an element of either I feel like I should say something to guide people to be wise in some way, which is very egotistical, but it's there. And then on the other hand, I do ask myself that question that he asked. It's like, do we really need to say everything about everything?
Yeah. I agree with that. And I think that when I first started with social media, it was like keeping people posted on the different things that I was doing, or it was, like I started on Facebook back when the status was like, Gail Gallagher is, and you had to frame all of your statuses in the is format. And I thought it was really helpful, in the context of like moving from different towns and being able to keep track of everybody and all of that. But it does come to a point where you think, I need to share everything constantly with the internet all of the time. In regards to the question of like, can you heal the world with comedy, or can you do this? And I think it's it it is helpful to we can only reflect from our individual viewpoints, and certainly a lot of the loudest voices are um the white people. But in the context of what we do with New Faith New Media, I think that there is something to be said about putting stuff out there that I mean, part of what it's founded on is that the loudest voices in the room are the more, conservative voices. Yeah. So like we're trying to be loud and, you know, exploring faith in different ways. Like there's a hole we're trying to fill. But also, I don't think I don't like having the context of this song is going to change somebody's life. I think everything you put out there is something that someone will encounter throughout their day, and it's going to be like another nugget in the brain that might like lead them on interesting thoughts and rabbit trails. But I don't think you should ever put so much pressure on your art that one piece of art is going to change somebody. And yes.
I proposed rethinking the question: comedy, music, theology, whatever. No, you can't heal the world with comedy, music, theology, whatever. But comedy, music, and theology, or whatever, can heal the world collectively. Take the you out of and by that I mean the me, or whatever the ego. Take the ego out of the equation and allow oneself to be a part of the conversation that may or may not heal the world.
I like that a lot. Yeah, we are a part of a conversation, and it is the network of conversations that are helpful. That being said, if what is the line? If you're in a house that's full of smoke, don't panic. Call me and I'll tell you a joke. Obviously, that is not where help can be. I mean, like there are limits.
Well, part of the problem with the cynicism that often comes out of stand-up comedians like Bo Burnham, like George Carlin, I think, is that yes, there's a real narcissism, especially in white liberal culture, that of thinking that we have to go out there and save the world. When, well, who the fuck are we to go out and save the world? We're the ones who made it the way it is. But on the other hand, there's a sense in which we often take that in a nihilistic direction of therefore we back off. And we do nothing. And well, that's a mark of our privilege too. I mean, because we're able to back off and do nothing without it affecting us too much. But people of poor, oppressed, marginalized, and working classes do not have that luxury. So.
And I will say this particular work is healing in its own right to the specific moment that we've all collectively lived through. Like, I think that's the irony of it, is that so I first watched this right as things were opening up and I was starting to be back to work and working in person, and really feeling a lot more sane because all of my rituals were back in place. And then I watched it again yesterday to prepare for this interview, and I felt extremely moved and reflective, especially of the feeling of like the all eyes on me at the very end, where it's just like the moment of like, come on in, the water's fine, like that so it's this very final sequence where he is hallucinating that he has an audience in front of him, and it's this kind of gorgeous song, and but on that line, don't be shy, come on in, the water's fine, all I could think of were the moments of my first like performances back in person, and going to my favorite bar, and for an open mic, and seeing the old hippie man that would always sing Pepsi Generation again. Like, that is the moment I thought of. And it's healing for me from the context of having some distance from the experience of 2020, and then being able to process it through this art that was made during that time. So it is healing in those contexts, but like, I've also been doing a bunch of other work, and then I can also relate to this art, you know.
What do you make of the fact that in that scene he notices the audience and then tries desperately to escape back into the house?
Oh, at the very end, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I guess I think about that in terms of learned helplessness. And how we get so used to living in that small, narrow space that it's hard for us to get back out again. And I, when you talk about, come on out, the water's fine, it will, that's part of the trauma that we'll have to deal with as a culture, is getting to that place of saying, yes, we've had to separate, we've had to be away and apart, and now we're having to shift back into, it's okay to get out again. It's okay to connect and to do those things.
So. Of course, as Wesley would often like to point out, really it's not. It's no more okay than it was in spring of 2020. It's just we've decided, fuck it. Yeah. And a few hundred thousand people died. C'est la vie.
It's a fair point.
I mean, we still hold that in places that we can't, we haven't processed, I think, too. Like, I think it's important to also be aware that we've been through a collective trauma, so things are going to be a little weird. you know. What you were saying about the going back into your box made me think of how Bo Burnham plays with aspect ratios in the different videos. So in different songs, he will have like the screen will narrow in so it looks like you're in a vertical cell phone, or it'll square out like you are in an Instagram square. And he like really plays with that in interesting ways. And that makes me want to segue into talking about the song White Woman's Instagram. And I know, Michelle, you have thoughts. I have thoughts.
Yes. So for me, I love how he's like naming the kinds of disparate objects of pictures that you might see. And then I hadn't noticed that piece of the framing until you pointed it out. And when I went back and I watched it, it made me think about, it's a perfect example of how we can sometimes treat social media. And when we think about this idea of putting out content and how like it is perfectly like we're framing the picture the way that we want it, whereas outside of it, you might get this nice little picture of like the loaf of bread on your counter, but you're missing the dishes that are dirty in the sink next to it, and to me, particularly we as women frame ourselves into that sense of perfection and having to do things a certain way. And I think that that has definitely been one of the not so helpful things that has come out of social media, is that it has made it easier to compare ourselves to other, and that makes it harder. But then what's really funny too is then you get this stream on social media that is like the honest pictures and all of that too, which is still its own framing,
right? Like there's still framing inside like the I am being authentic, I hear that. And listeners, in case you've stumbled onto this and haven't watched Bo Burnham's Inside, well, first of all, just go to Netflix and watch it. But also, I'll read through this list. So we have latte foam art, tiny pumpkins, fuzzy, comfy socks, a coffee table made out of driftwood, a bobblehead of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, a needlepoint of a fox, and then, oh boy, some random quote from Lord of the Rings, incorrectly attributed to Martin Luther King.
Yeah, and the picture of your mom in the caption.
Oh my
Can't.
gosh. Yeah, so that's the moment where the frame goes out, is like when
Mhm.
she has this vulnerable moment of grief and like posting about, the vulnerability. And
Mhm.
so the screen widens out and then it widens back in as she's like talking about all the things that she's doing and like the positive elements and like back into that performativeness.
Yeah.
Um
So, and then the other aspect of it is this heaven, or is it just a white woman's Instagram? And so, how do we describe heaven?
mhm.
And again, we get this kind of frame and this idealized picture of
Mhm.
what heaven can look like. And I think we'll find it might be very different
Mhm.
than that image. So, and then the other element for me was, again, in the larger context of the social critiques, is this element of being a white woman and recognizing that sometimes we have been some of the worst in race conversations,
Mhm.
because early feminism did not really include women of color. And we were some of the ones who were the pearl clutchers about not protect my children from desegregation and
Mm.
all of that. So
And all the turfy business too.
yeah, so just thinking about that element of not just Instagram, but a white woman's Instagram.
Mhm.
So, but curiously, there's not really a description and a picture of what the Instagram of a person of color might look like, or would they even have one?
Mm.
So, just an interesting thought.
Yeah.
Is the
Well,
entire
sorry, you go.
no
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, I think the choice to just comment on like there's a lot of commentary on, taking down like the white liberal experience, which is like, okay, that's what you can speak to. So, I think that choice is, what he's speaking to there. But I think, yeah, it is very much curated perfection and curated whiteness, and um but I mean, that there's a whole thing about like uh girl boss feminism and that sort of hustle, and that's a whole other rabbit hole. But Andrew, what were you going to say?
Well, I was going to say, is there such a thing as authenticity? Because it seems to me that, at least in my head, there's a sense in which comedy specials like this make me start to think of how can I live my life in such a way whereby a comedian can't possibly make fun of it.
Mhm.
And it's like, well, is this a thing, right? I mean, we're searching for some kind of authenticity, right? And to me, that's what the white woman's Instagram is about, at least from my male gaze.
Mhm.
And this sense of you're narrowing the focus to stage your presence on social media, while not showing everybody what's out of focus. And yet it seems to me as though, all right, so we make fun of white liberals, and I think maybe white leftists, white progressives is a better way to put it. Liberalism is a fraught word, but all right. On the other hand, well, I'm a white leftist. What else am I supposed to do other than be a leftist? I don't know what else to do. I mean, obviously, I realize I'm privileged. I mean, I realize that my entire being is problematic. On the other hand, the only way to deal with it is to fight it,
Mhm.
and the only way to fight it is in a way that is inevitably going to be problematic and inauthentic and fodder for a comedian.
Yeah.
So do I take this kind of comedy and run with it in a cynical direction of saying, well, I'm just going to back off and shut up?
Yeah.
And it's like, no, that's not the right response either.
Well,
Well,
and no, I lost it. Come back. Come back. Come back. Come back.
Damn
Um
thought trains.
that thought train just went away. Oh, authenticity. Okay. So, um to answer your question, is there such a thing as authenticity? I think it's something you can approach, but the thing in social media is like, or any communication, is that you are you have to create something in order to communicate with that larger space. Like, even if you're writing like a status or you are taking a picture or something, there's an element of like there's some sort of intentionality, there's some sort of like even mild amount of curating in there, and also whatever you post is there for the moment that it was posted in. So it might be authentic to who you were in that moment, but then things shift and change from there. And then so much of our arguments are, reacting to something where someone could have posted something that was not well thought out in the moment because they were posting from a place of venting, and now they've shoved a foot in their mouth, you know. And even as we are, recording this podcast, this is a moment in time that we are recording and that we are sharing with people. And then later we can go and look back at it and be like, I have different thoughts now. We are still making and creating a thing. And I'm not going to say the C word, but we're not content. Oh no, I said it. We're still making and creating a thing. But actually what I just said there made me think of the line from Problematic where he's like, I've done a lot of self-reflecting since the previous verse. Like, even then.
Yeah, and and that's where I wanted to go next. When Andrew said problematic, I'm like, we got to talk about problematic and how, who defines what's problematic. That word in itself is also problematic.
Well, and it also makes me think of clinical pastoral education, the idea of self-reflection as a spiritual discipline. And it really, there was one line in there that I don't have the lyrics in front of me, my apologies, but something about it's okay to be a douchebag as long as I'm honest about being a douchebag. Does that ring a bell?
Like, yeah. And then there's a later line where it's like self-reflection isn't, I forget what the line was. I think it may have been spoken, but it was like about self-reflection not being, the same as accountability or something like that.
Well, and I love that he's like, he shows the non-apology apology that we get on social media. Like, I did this thing wrong, I'm sorry. And I love how the imagery that he uses is the image of the crucifixion. They do not know what they do. I do not know what I do. And this sense of like, it takes on that sense of cancel culture, right? And how like, you're absolutely right that we can say something in the moment and then go back later and the moment has changed, the context has changed. And how do we deal with that in a place where we have this mountain of content that keeps building and building? And yes, I just said the C word again. So, welcome to the internet.
Welcome to the internet.
I suppose we could do a theology of content in the sense that, your refusal to say the term made me think of, well, is it really content? Because it's sort of extent. It's out there. Is it being contained in something? And is the insistence upon using the word content implying that somehow a message can be contained and controlled when perhaps it really can't? And perhaps that's the real issue. Like, there is no content. It's extent. I'm not sure if I'm using that or if I'm making that word up, but it's out there. It's not contained.
Right. Well, and also it's it's a work. Like, it also depends on what you mean. Like, if you are just posting statuses and like your thoughts and like one word sentence, like, when did that become content? And when did like photos that you're like posting on Instagram become content? Like, it's just like, what is the difference?
And yet it has.
And yet it has. Like, what is the difference between like, here is a picture from my vacation. Hey friends, here's this baby. Like, the baby's not content. It's just, I want to share this thing with the internet. Like, it's I guess my theology of content, it's like, there's different methods of sharing, but I think there's a difference between a impulsive share and a larger work?
It's interesting. The story when reading a book, I am convinced that when reading a book or a piece of literature, the story takes place in the reader's mind. It doesn't take place on the page. The page of the book is simply the template, right? But the story takes place in the head, right? And so I wonder if there's a dynamic at play here of we're not canceling. With some exceptions, like for instance, I think we should cancel, like, say, the Ku Klux Klan, right? Cancel those bastards. But someone who doesn't intend racism but is racist, right? What we're canceling there is what they said and how it interacts in our minds, right? But I imagine they didn't intend for it to interact in our mind the way it interacted in our mind, right? Am I making sense?
Yeah, but then my next thought is, like, impact is,
yes, exactly.
As Wesley would say, it doesn't. Your
Absolutely.
intentions don't matter for shit. It's the actual impact.
Absolutely. And the question that I have is there is a live ethical question there of to what extent are we responsible for our impact versus our intention? Because there's a philosopher. I was about to say there's a philosopher by the name of Immanuel Kant, as if we have never heard of him, because he's only one of the most famous. Immanuel Kant says ought implies can, right? The idea that you can hold someone responsible for something is it implies that they have some control over the thing over which you're holding them responsible, right? If they have no control over it, then there's only a limited sense in which you could hold them responsible for it, right? In terms of moral responsibility. So one of the conservative pushbacks, I think, to the idea of cancel culture or the idea of holding people responsible for impact as well as intent is that people have less control over their impact than they have over their intention. Now, I agree that we should hold people responsible for their impact, or at the very least, not being a dick involves, oh my God, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to say that I didn't mean to come off that way. I mean, how can I make amends? Or how can I be? I mean, clearly what I said was hurtful, and I didn't mean it to be, but what I meant doesn't matter. Let's work through the hurt of what I said.
Yeah,
but
can
still,
I do better next time?
Yeah. But still, on the other hand, I mean, there is a live question about moral responsibility vis-a-vis control. Okay.
Yeah, I get that. And I think the thing that is so hard with these pile-ons that happen, and like especially like on Twitter, is because everybody is so quick to jump in and make that snap judgment. There isn't room for like dialogue. I will also say I feel like cancel culture is a word we use for other words that are better. Like there's cancel culture that is bullying, and there's cancel culture that is calling people and holding people accountable. And there's different things underneath that umbrella. And I think the more people can like slow down and talk and not do it on a public forum where everybody's us and theming all over the place, the issue is it's like platforms like Twitter and Facebook are not places to really clean up those messes. They're the places where the messes happen, and then it just gets more messy. And I say that knowing like all the neuroscience shenanigans, as far as how when we are on, and like The Social Dilemma covered this, and a bunch of other books covered this. Listeners, I've been deep, well and truly down the rabbit hole of how social media reprograms the mind, and it's a whole thing. But
yeah, maybe allowing media corps to explore to exploit neurochemical drama for profit.
Yeah. There's even a line in inside about that, right?
Yeah.
But when you are in this place of taking in all of this information super fast and making all these judgments, like, that is not the place for nuance,
Yeah, it's kind of over the last few years, I have developed, it's not original to me, and I can't think of who kind of have said it first, but I've developed my bumper sticker rule, where if my theology could fit on a bumper sticker, there's probably some work to do.
Mm-hmm.
Because that very rarely can good theology be whittled down to that.
Which if things are more nuanced than 240 characters.
Right.
I think cancel culture and political correctness, which was the thing that outraged the right before cancel culture, which is really the same thing, are inevitable.
Mm-hmm.
The right has its own version of cancel culture. It used to
don't say gay.
Well, yeah, don't say gay. Back in the late '90s, early 2000s, it was using cuss words in local television, right? Or showing certain risque or indecent things on public or local television. I mean, that's just politically incorrect, or that they want to cancel that. I mean, the issue is not whether cancel culture or political correctness are good things. They are. The question is whether or not a particular piece of content should be canceled or deemed politically incorrect.
Mm-hmm.
And if we can have the argument over that, then I think it would be a far more fruitful argument, rather than just calling out, well, that's just cancel culture. Like,
And again, with problematic, I think what I like about that song too is it shows the mental gymnastics and linguistics, and we tie ourselves in knots trying to figure that out.
Oh, that's awesome. It's mental gymnastics and he's like doing the workout. I hadn't thought of that connection, but that's kind of cool.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that either, but yeah.
What you were saying about looking at different art forms and that are problematic and do we cancel them or not? That made me think of a couple things. One, I went back and I listened to the soundtrack of Book of Mormon in the first time in forever, and woof. There are some things where I'm like, ooh, that is 2010 humor, and that does not work anymore. And so I had that moment, but then that made me think of an Amber Ruffin sketch, where Amber Ruffin was talking about, about sort of the larger conversation about not saying certain words and this, that, and the other thing. And she's basically like, all right, well, I'm going through my closet, and here is this pair of hot pants that says, racial slur on it. Well, these don't fit anymore, so these are really tacky and they need to go away. All right, here's this, ratty sweater that has this other problematic phase. Yeah, we're done with this. And so it's just like this idea of like, okay, we're cleaning out the closet and we don't need this anymore, so.
Well, two things. I think there is a sense, if I can pull it to, and I swear this is related, but pulling it to how the world works.
Yes.
And that is
the song "How the World Works."
Right. The song from why do you rich fucking white people insist on it seeing every socio-political conflict through the myopic lens of your own self-actualization? Because the problem with going through your closet and my closet and throwing stuff out is, all right, well, I actually enjoy South Park. I mean, there are so many jokes in South Park that are just so racist and so sexist and so horrid, or Family Guy, or, pick your medium there. I enjoy it. Does that mean that I'm a bad person? Because we white men, we have to be good people. We have to be good people. We have to be good people. It's so important that we be good, that we be on the right side. Because why? Well, because we see all of these socio-political conflicts through the myopic lens of our own self-actualization.
And not just be good, but appear good for others. To me, that's the bigger thing. And again, that gets back to the framing and the how we present ourselves to the world, which I think he gets to that in How the World Works with, it's easy when we wear a mask to not to say things, but then when you start talking through a puppet, you start getting a little bit deeper conversation, I suppose, or different conversation.
Yeah.
There's also the sense in which safety, I mean, the balance of safety versus unsafety, because part of my problem with Twitter conversation and Facebook conversation and social media conversation and the lack of nuance that you were talking about, Gail, is that people don't have the safety to feel safe in being but stupid. I mean, part of learning and growing is going out there and just being but stupid. And like having the experience of, wow, I said something that was really stupid, and now I'm gonna move past it. But the problem is that nowadays it seems that when people say things that are but stupid because they don't know any better, the response is whack, 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 whack. And
it's like, crucify him, crucify him.
Yeah, and like in a normal conversation, you would say something stupid, and then someone would be like, I don't know about that, and then you'd be like, okay, boop-a-doop-a-doop, moment over. But when it's in writing and it's there and people are piling on and they don't have, context, it's just a mess, and then you are constantly being pinged and punished and feeling those crucify him. It's like if you're on a highway and, you have a weird interaction that's kind of scary, and then you move on and you go, but the internet be like, hey, remember that time when you almost got hit? That guy was a real jerk. Why did he go in your lane? And then that's just like, it just keeps coming back when it could have just been like one interaction,
There's no incentive to repent, and there's no incentive to forgive. Like, there's no incentive to seek the truth. There is only the incentive to assert the ego.
Yeah.
That's well said.
Yeah. And I don't know how that changes other than people showing different ways to interact over time and unplugging a little bit. But
well, we on the left do it particularly bad, I find. That we on the left, and it comes from, I think, I'd like to think it comes from a good place of calling out racism and calling out sexism and calling out the fact that language has meaning. And so when you use sexist and racist language, you may not intend to be, but you are being racist and sexist. Now, calling that out is important, but on the other hand, there is a sense in which it goes to the point at which we failed to realize, all right, all right, he's acknowledged, she's acknowledged it, forgive and move on. Yeah. Otherwise, they have the offender, if you want to call them that, has no incentive to repent. They just see themselves as under attack, and so they defend.
Yeah.
And that doesn't get us to where we on the left want to go, which is to a society of racial justice or sexual.
Right. And I mean, how much do you think too is when it's in text, your brain interprets text in a different way than visually, right? I mean, you might still get in arguments yelling. I mean, arguments still happen when we're like speaking and stuff like that. But reading text, your brain interprets it, in different ways. It's that, there is this whole story that happens in your mind. So something
we are missing some of the social cues of communication.
Exactly.
That come with facial expression, tone of voice, volume, those kinds of things.
Yeah. And I think that's why the in-person conversation is so much more important, or is so helpful. This is why I process things better through podcasts. Cheesy gesture. Because you do get to hear the voices and the nuance, and I think that's part of what is important, is modeling randos having nuanced conversations.
There was a joke that the comedian George Carlin told. Do you ever notice how the degree to which someone is an asshole is directly proportional to the distance they are from you? In other words, someone who is really, really far away on the television or in text. Of course, George Carlin died in 2007, so it's, the text wasn't. It was a thing, but it wasn't as much of a thing as it is now. But if someone is away on text or away on social media or way on the television, they're an asshole. But if someone is sitting right next to me, this guy is an asshole. So there's a sense in which being in the room with someone, I think, really tempers the anger and vitriol with which we interact with someone.
I definitely agree, and I want to pivot to one of the points I wanted to talk about, which is inside one of the through lines is, can you be funny while stuck in your room? And this idea of making things as an artist and as a creator, navigating the awkwardness of making things and not having that immediate response and not having someone in the room with you. And so I don't know the exact heart of the question. I just want to sort of riff into that world a little bit.
Yeah.
I sincerely hope we can be, and maybe this is the naivete that he's critiquing in healing the world with comedy. But it seems to me that if we couldn't be funny while being stuck in our room, why, that would be a horrid world. I'm not sure that's the world I want to live in.
No. Yeah.
It's not exactly about being funny, but I think back to when all of us clergy leader types had to suddenly do online worship, and the awkwardness that took of, I know I'm speaking to my congregation, but all I see is a camera that I'm sitting in front of. And how you're right that it's like we want to, and I knew that it was like in that sense I felt that pressure, like we talk about, of creating content to share. But it is that pressure, right? It is that place of feeling like we have to do that. And yet you're right that it's like, can we? Maybe. It's different. It has to look different.
There's a certain like trust and a certain like there's a certain trust and confidence you have to have in your creative work as you are working, on it alone, and then shipping it out into the internet and into the void, like of being like, well, I think this is funny. I've shown it to a couple other friends, or I think this flows correctly, and I have this vision and I'm executing it, and it's coming from this, deep place, and then you just put it out there and you hope for that reaction. But it is different than actually being able to be in front of an audience and get that direct feedback. And there's not having that direct response is really difficult. And that was the thing in the pandemic of like performing and like having a chat window and like little hearts and things like that, but not being able to actually hear people's responses, or having to navigate a chat window while you're performing, which is the worst because I have a squirrel brain and I hate it. I hate it when it's like people are like, "Oh, I love that stuff," and it's just like I'm performing. Like, I don't know. Okay, tangent, but like, what bothered me the most about Zoom Church was the chat window. And maybe it's like the weird, like, ancient, like, Catholic, like, we shut up during church, thing. But I could not concentrate because people were in the chat window, like, commenting on the sermon as it was happening. And I was like, this feels wrong. And, like, yeah.
Speaking of ancient Catholic things, there is no such in our tradition, and I realize this is not your all's tradition, and that's fine. In our tradition, there is no such thing as online worship. Catholic worship, in our understanding, does still require physical touch, and so it's not possible to have Eucharist through electronic media. I would assert that it's possible to do confession through Eucharist through electronic media, but there is actually a debate in independent and Roman Catholic circles around whether or not that's possible. But the point is that the act of forcing us inside, the act of forcing us inside when to be human is to be in community, is, I mean, that's the real tragedy of the pandemic, and balancing the need for safety with the need for connectivity. It's
yeah.
And for me, that was one of the overarching themes of the whole thing is, what does it mean to be connected? For me, it's not an accident that I described it in some of my viewing and in our pre-conversations. I said it feels like a slow descent into madness, because it is there is an element in which you're right, the human community of being in person, sharing the same air, the same atoms is not the same as this virtual conversation. Now, someday could our brains evolve to see them as the same and to have the same impact? Maybe, but we're not there yet.
I like your description of it as a slow. What is it? A slow
descent into madness.
Slow descent into madness, because in that sense, what Bo Burnham demonstrates in the course of the performance is what happens when human beings are cut off from their community.
Exactly.
Yeah. And what happens to art when you're doing it alone and you're also going through mental health issues, and like, when can you make art and when are you just too
yeah, because like sometimes he's just laying there covered in a blanket with a microphone by him.
Yes.
It's interesting. I really loved the special, but I find it odd calling it a comedy special, because a comedy special is in an auditorium with where people are laughing. And that was the first thing that struck me, is that although this special was brilliant, I don't think I'd watch it for pure entertainment. And the reason why is because it doesn't seem like a comedy special to me. It's there's no laugh track. Well, there is he creates kind of a laugh track in one scene, but there's no laugh track. And that was the first thing that struck me, is like, without a laugh track, I don't know where to laugh. I don't know what to think is funny. I had to really kind of think through it. It took some effort on my part, and I wonder if that right there is goes to what you're talking about doing art in person, doing performances in person versus doing this all from the comfort of our room. Is that there's a sense in which society kind of gives us permission, if that's the way to do it, or gives us cues onto, this is funny, or if that makes sense.
Yeah, and it also plays with the difference between like live theater and like film, and how those are very different mediums. And when you are somebody who who does stand up, and you are always in a room with an audience, and it is all about your relationship with the audience, having that relationship flipped and being a content creator is completely different, and it feels very much like you're serving this outward place, and you can't see what effect you're having, and it is frustrating. And yeah, and it's different, and it does not have that exact audience feedback. It's like, this means to an end, and it's like, okay, then why am I even doing this? Like, what are you doing as an artist if you don't have the audience?
Well, and then what's interesting then is that plays out in the sense of, he talks about, I've been working on this forever, and I'm not sure I ever want to finish it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's that sense of, do I want to put this out into the world, or do I risk that or not?
Which is also a phase where you're just like, well, I'm having fun by myself doing this thing, and I don't know if I want the world to see it. But then once you do complete it, you are, like, there is this sense of being not necessarily being done with the work, but also moving away from the space that you were in when you made the work.
Does that turn writing, the act of writing? I mean, my artwork is writing, basically. It's the one thing I can do. Does that turn writing into a form of reading, or singing into a form of listening, right? Because at the end of the day, I mean, we do it without an audience. For instance, I've never published a book. I've written several books, but I've never published one, and I don't think I ever will. But sure as shit had fun writing them, and writing the story was an exercise that helped to give the world some meaning and order to me. And so I wonder if there's a sense in which being a content creator is just another way of being a member of an audience.
Yeah, it kind of depends on what you're thinking about as you're making the. I mean, maybe it depends on what you're thinking about as you're making the thing.
Well, and as we're doing this here, I mean, New Faith New Media's audience isn't that big, but we still do it because I don't know. As I've thought about it, it's not for them so much as the audience, so much as it is for us, at least as I'm thinking about it, because it's a lot of fun to talk about movies and it's a lot of fun to think through theology, and it helps me to make meaning in the world. And if others want to listen, why, I'm flattered. But at the end of the day, if others don't want to listen, why, I'm still going to do it because it's fun.
Where, and I enjoy the being able to talk about things part, but I feel like I'm a little bit more audience focused. I'm a little bit more like, I hope somebody hears this and is willing to have a dialogue and having a conversation. Like, I love it when people engage with me about a thing that I put out there. I feel like I'm starting a conversation.
Yeah.
And so and I also am somebody who will like DM people that I am fans of with complete abandon. Not a complete abandon. I'm not a weirdo, but I will like say like, "Hey, that was a really cool thing you did," or tweet at people and stuff like that. I like having that dialogue, and I as an artist like receiving that dialogue.
Yeah, and I'm with you, Gail. I think the question that has been coming to my mind in this conversation is, it's kind of the equivalent of if a tree falls in the forest and no one hears it, is there sound? If we write something but don't share it, is it art? Or is it the fact that art, it becomes art when we have that interaction, when we have that conversation about it together?
And I would say it is art, but I think there is art that we make for ourselves and that art we make for other people. Like, I do think like the one song I wrote on a night where I was feeling particularly vulnerable and moody, and it was sad AF, and I don't want to share it with anybody. That's still art, but that's like my own, song.
There's also a sense in which, because this goes to the idea, I mean, we keep centering on this word content, and I wonder if one of the ways in which it might be helpful to think about it, and one of the ways in which perhaps your resistance to the word, Gail, works, is that the content creators, or at least those whom we usually describe as the content creators, are really not the content creators. They're the extent creators. They're the ones who put stuff out. The content creators are the people who listen, because they're the ones who take that extent into the mind and contain it and make meaning out of it. In other words, they're the ones who create the content. And it seems to me that the author is another reader, right? So for instance, you take Harry Potter. I mean, the story of Harry Potter as it occurs in J.K. Rowling's head is very, very different than the story of Harry Potter as it occurs in my head, right? And I mention her specifically because she tries to take an awful lot of control, I feel, over the story as an author, when I would argue she's just the first reader. Like she's the one who read the story first, generated the template for all of us to construct the story in our own heads. And it's interesting. I too long for an audience, and I too want New Faith New Media to make it as a media organization. On the other hand, if it doesn't, and maybe this is just self-justification on my end, if it doesn't, well, we've still got 4 audience members who I think have at least had a very positive experience in consuming the content that we've created from these interactions in our minds.
Yeah, and I think it is important to not like you have to not obsess too much about what the audience is, but there is a certain amount of hope for, having people listen, and a lot of it is egoic, but it's helpful to frame it in people and not numbers. Like, there's an adage of like, well, okay, you had 40 people listen to your song, but if they were all in your living room, That's a lot of people, you know. But yeah, I think it is helpful to hear that aspect. I will also say, I've been trying to be more, um, you know, open to what shows up audience wise. I've been in the online communities that are like all super into like numbers and growing your music business and all that stuff, which is great and good, but like it can get a little bit much.
It's like the pastors who are so focused on how many congregation members we get.
Mm.
You know, there's that element of we can put too much emphasis on that.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
So
Um,
the
So about Marx.
yeah, let's talk
Yes.
about Sacco.
Well, he is the very model of a modern far leftist in every way, right down to I mean the of course the line that hooked me is the global network of capital essentially functions to separate the worker from the means of production. Well, that's straight out of Marx. The idea that we do not own our own means of production is the origin of inequality, the separation of in the Marxist schema, um, uh, two classes, proletariat and bourgeoisie. Now, classes are not economic strata. You can have very, very rich proletarians, and you can have very, very poor bourgeoisie. What a bourgeois person is someone who owns capital goods, and a capital good is a good or a means of production, labor, land, factory, that sort of thing. Whereas a proletarian is someone who doesn't own means of production, so as a result has to sell their labor power for wages, right? Sell themselves essentially for wages, right? And well, what happens to the stuff that they make, to the value that they generate? Well, it is expropriated by the bourgeois class. In other words, it is separated from them. The worker doesn't have control over the value they create. The capitalists have control over the value they create. And so they're separated from that. They're alienated from their species being. Marx calls it the species being. Stop me at any time.
This is good stuff.
My brain is going immediately to why I enjoy producing my own work and like asking if being able to make your own music and being able to make your own art, where does being a content creator then fall in that spectrum?
Okay, so Marx talks about, and this is the early Marx, this is the Marxism before it kind of became what we often describe and decry as kind of cold economism, although that's really not fair. But the early Marx, the Marx of the economic and philosophic manuscripts, that sort of thing, talks about what he calls the species being of the human being, right? In other words, the human person as is the person who has the ability to take nature and transform it into other forms of nature, right? That's what it means to be human. It's to transform nature, right, into other forms of nature that we find useful. All right. Now there are some problematic aspects of that, but laying that aside. All right. What that means is that we should be at home and at work, right? That when we go to work, we should feel ourselves at home because we're being creative, we're being ourselves, we're taking nature and we're making something new and out of it, right? I actually think there's as a theistic Marx, I actually think there's something that connects in there that connects us to the imago Dei, the image of God, that God as a creator, human beings as a creator, human beings are in the image of God in the sense that we have a relationship with nature that includes the ability to change nature. But unfortunately, we go into work and we look at the clock, right? We can't wait to get off work. Why? Because we're not at home in our labor. We're away from home in our labor. We experience it as alienating and estranging. And the reason why is because we have no control over it. We don't decide what we produce, when we produce, how much of it, and to whom it goes to. That's all decided for us. We're just cogs in a wheel, right? And so to me, the production of one's own music, the empowerment of creating one's own content, determining how that content is used, that's a very, very empowering thing. I mean, it connects you to your species being. It's you deciding to be creative. And so when someone who isn't a creator, at best they're an entrepreneur, right? They're an organizer, and there's room for that kind of labor. But when someone who isn't gets to determine how that content or product is used, and you are separated from it, you are alienated from the control of it, you're going to experience that as alienating. Now, where a lot of Marxists, perhaps not so much Marx or Engels, but where a lot of Marxists go off the rails is they become what we would call economic determinists. In other words, racism can be it can be brought back to that fundamental alienation and that fundamental estrangement and that fundamental exploitation. In other words, all of the world's problems boil down to economic problems. So if you solve the economic problem, you solve the world's problems. Bullshit. But to me, that's where I would critique Marx, but or critique Marxists. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, no. I think you got it in there. And where I went with the idea of having the means of production being a creator as empowering, my next thought was then, so then is the battle of social media and attention and having to go through the platforms, that is sort of the that is like the creator struggle that's happening.
Well, and I think about his conversation about us content creators having to be a brand that has to, again, back to that conversation about having to say something. It's not just about, do you want to buy Wheat Thins? It's, will you support Wheat Thins in their fight against Lyme disease? It's that kind of thing. And to me, where I think this kind of leads me back to where we bristle with that word content. And I think what it comes down to is the tragedy of where we are in social media land is that, is it just about creating art for art's sake anymore? Or is it about, you can't just enjoy something for enjoying it, but now you have to make it into a brand and you have to sell it as content, and you have to hustle and survive that way, right? And so many people, it's literally like content creators are selling themselves for their economic well-being
and selling nothing.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. I interrupted.
Yeah,
it's a good point.
Yeah.
Well, no, and selling Mark. There's a piece of Marxism that I'd like to bring to bear at this point in the discussion called the labor theory of value. In other words, value and all of economics, and I think Marx is right here. All of economics boils down to the production of real stuff. Right? Without the production of real stuff, there is no economy. And that's one thing that we in our economy can't get, or we've forgotten, because we live in a finance economy, right? We live in an economy based on the production of debt, which is just a future claim, or the claim on a present claim on future production, right? And we live in a service economy, right? Where we serve people, we work retail, we work in food stores, but even all of that is based on the production of real stuff. Without the production of real stuff, the actual taking of physical material and transforming it, none of that stuff matters. None, like, there would be no service economy, there would be no finance economy, there would be no debt, none of it. And
yet we are moving into an information economy.
Well, yeah, but even then, what are we transmitting information on? This thing has to be made by someone. Or the things that
you're
make
holding
this
up a
thing
phone
have to be made by something, right? And the thing is that I would pull that into the idea of, we were talking about content creation, or the creation of Twitter tweets as content, right? The more substance a thing has, the more value it has, right? I would say that you can say that there is more material substance, and I'm using material in a different way than Marx used it, right? But material substance in, say, the book Moby Dick than there is in the tweet.
Mm-hmm.
So there's less value in the tweet, and I'm wondering if we're fighting over nothing, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's no value in a tweet. There's nothing there. There's no there. We're fighting over nothing. There's a sense in which, and Marx talks about this. How does the worker respond to alienation? Well, with religion, right? Of course, religion in the sense of they create non-existent entities and worship them, right? Or better yet, we drink, or we watch television, or we live vicariously through other people, through non-existent entities, because we can't have an authentic existence in our real life. So we live vicariously through others. There's no value there. There's no value in the television. There's no value. I mean, there is, but there's no value in drinking. There's no value in any of this stuff. That's what Twitter is. We don't have power to shape public policy, so we comment on it on Twitter. Sorry.
I'm trying to rail it back, but I've lost the train. Yes, but within that is, yeah, there's I don't know. Okay.
In other words, it is Twitter and social media are, and the way we fight and argue over it, are manifestations over the ways in which we are alienated from our species being. Because if we were at home in our species being, we would have control and say, or at least a democratic control, not direct control, but democratic. We'd have a voice, right, in saying, all right, well, I want my, I helped make this car. I think this car should be sold for to the poor at dirt cheap. Well, I helped make this car, and I think we should sell this car for a certain amount to make a profit of. All right, well, let's gather all the workers together and let's have a discussion and vote on it, right? And I walk away from that. If, let's say, I lost it, all right, well, I had a say. I made my case and I lost, but still, I had a say. I had a sense of control. Right. And I was able, it's something that I was able to throw myself into, and I was able to get lost in it and be part of the beautiful democratic socialism of determining what to do with this wonderful piece of nature that we've transformed into something that can be used by people. And yet, when I don't have that, when I have no power in my life, well, I watch Batman because Batman has power in his life, and I live vicariously through him. Am I making sense?
Well, I think so. And where I want to jump off from that is then the value of art, and so where the value of art plays in that narrative, but also the value of art and also the value of being an artist, and and the there's several different thoughts going on there, but I think in regards to like Twitter and Facebook and sort of what causes us to interact with those things, like I find myself okay, audience, here's the thing. I am currently doing a social media fast. I've been feedless for I went feedless for Lent, and I'm going feedless for like the next 90 days, and just totally making sure to like reprogram my mental algorithms, as it were, because I can't stand the constant stream of information and all of these things. So what I am thinking about is as I've been reflecting on these things, I've been thinking a lot about how and why one posts the Facebook status, and sort of what brings you to Twitter, what brings you to those discussions. And sometimes it's a thought that is like a little kernel of a 140 carat thought that could be an essay, but instead of developing it into a larger thought, an essay or a song, it's, it goes out as a tweet, but it is a creative impulse. And so I think I sort of how I look at it is, how can I take these creative impulses and put them into larger things, and sort of I need to frame this into a question because I've sort of lost my thread as well. But I do you see Twitter and Facebook and things as the creative impulse, and where does that resonate with you? Yes.
They can be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it depends on why.
Yeah.
Is it that we are posting out of our own sense of drama or unmet need, or is it that I feel like this is something valuable to share?
There's a tension, I feel, between different understandings of value. So for instance, Marx's labor theory of value is that value is determined by the socially necessary labor time to create the product, whatever the product is. It could be a physical thing or, say, a book, right? If it, and I wonder if, and I don't know, but I wonder if it can be helpful. So a lot of times people, when they tweet, are just tweeting nonsense. And I wonder if there's a difference in value between something that is well thought out, even if it's only 140 characters or however many, versus something that is just nonsense, right? And that perhaps the socially necessary labor time of, and maybe I'm using that phrase wrong, of generating the tweet and as translated into having it be well thought out, well felt out, that sort of thing, could help in determining its value. But on the other hand, I also do believe that there's a place for art, for art's sake. Whereas a true Marxist, a thoroughgoing Marxist, say no, there is no place for art's sake. That's counter-revolutionary. That's fascist. But and they have reasons for saying that. But I actually think that not all value is can be objectified by socially necessary labor time. That there is a sense in which, well, it can be valuable to you because it's valuable to you. And I don't know how to resolve that tension.
Yeah, and my next thought is how can you perceive the different values when you are in the place of, can I interest you in everything all of the time?
There was at the very beginning of the pandemic, there was an Episcopal priest who made a video in which he was in his vestments, dancing through an empty church to the Hamilton song, "You'll Be Back." You'll be back, da 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 da. And I thought that was so cute. Don't know what made me think of that.
Well, that's part of the everything all of the time that you see on the internet.
Yeah, sometimes we have not done a good job of helping people to sort out what is valuable and meaningful. And it is partly that there is not always an easy objective value. Because yes, some tweets may not be valuable, and yet there may be some tweets that change the world, right? That have value. And part of that is context and meaning.
Well, and it takes a tremendous amount of labor time to write Moby Dick, I imagine, but comparatively less labor time to write out a 140-page or 140-character tweet. And yet, there's so much meaning and power that you can squeeze into so few characters, just because something takes more time to do. And I realize that if a Marxist were sitting in front of me saying, well, that's not really what Marx meant, shut up. But just because something takes more time to do does not in and of itself suggest that something is more or less valuable. Da 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 da.
Yeah, my brain is melted, so I don't know if there's any other points or rabbit holes we want to go down.
So Gail, if you were preaching a sermon on this,
yeah, if I were preaching a sermon on this, I would probably either do can you be funny while stuck in a room, or can I interest you in everything all of the time, or look, I made you some content. Those were the different titles I would go but I think the one that jumps out at me the most is the can you be funny while stuck in a room, or something along those lines, talking about the importance of the audience and the importance of community and the artistic process. I think that's what I would do. Who wants to go next?
Why do you rich fucking white people insist upon seeing every socio-political conflict through the myopic lens of your own self-actualization, which really I think speaks to this idea of grace in Christian theology. The notion that grace really, if we see it correctly, deconstructs the idea that we have to be a good person. That what matters is our being a better person. Like I think the idea of God's grace really deconstructs that notion and presents us an alternative notion of you don't have to be a better person. You don't have to be anything. You are a creature, and God delights in your creatureliness.
I think it just, I just thought of this, but I think I might have something to do with, some of the letters that Paul wrote from prison, and kind of playing with that idea of creating content for people that he's, he can't see them, but he's trying to still share his message with the world, even under these difficult circumstances. So I think about Paul, a prisoner for Christ, some of that. So that's kind of where my mind's going, along with what you guys have shared as well.
Da, 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 da.
Well, Gail, we are so glad that you have joined us for this conversation of a pastor and a priest walk into a comedy club and have shared this work with us. What are we talking about next, Andrew?
Next is also Gail's pick, Dogma.
Oh! Ooh. Well, we'll have to talk about that.
Now, I do not intend to be offensive to any duck-billed platypus enthusiasts out there.
Well, and this is where we go into content creator mode, I genuinely do thank everyone who has listened with us and who engages in our conversation and who makes that happen. We thank you, all of our patrons on Patreon, those who have supported our launch for our new website that we just got going at newfaithnewmedia.net. And we invite you to continue in the conversations on our forums there, and just to like and share this information anywhere you go. And there are some other opportunities for helping support the work that we do and helping to continue to share messages that we hope are meaningful and hope have contributed in some way to the conversation in our world in ways that are needed. And so we thank all of you, and we hope that we can bring a little healing to the world through our theology, and we offer this up and share it to you today. So thanks for joining us.
Bye.